When asked how many touchdowns his team would score against the Seattle Seahawks, St. Louis receiver Mel Gray couldn't keep a secret. And why not? For very few offensive teams possess the balance and versatility of the St. Louis Cardinals. Terry Metcalf is a one-man ground game whose enormous talent nearly overshadows that of his running mate, NFC rushing champion Jim Otis. Quarterback Jim Hart is a proven winner, and Cardinal receiving is deep to the last man, in this case, rookie Pat Tilley. Against Seattle, St. Louis jumped to a 20-point lead. But Jack Patera's Seahawks have acquired a reputation as a come-from-behind football team, a reputation they upheld with class against the Cardinals. Rookie Jim Zorn's 72-yard hookup with Sam McCullum narrowed the Cardinal lead to 13. Later, the scrambling left-hander demonstrated the ability to improvise that has earned him a starting job in the NFL. Jim Zorn is the unchallenged hero of Pacific Northwest football fans. But despite his heroic efforts, few expansion teams have ever won their first NFL game. The comeback fell short. In St. Louis, the Cardinals opened with 5 field goals and a 15-0 lead. While the Birds were footloose, the Packers were performing like footstools. Even this apparent Packer score by Ken Payne was called out of bounds, and a victory boogaloo became a symbolic bump and bobble. The Packer pattern of ineptitude was consistent throughout the afternoon, and each new disaster spelled opportunity for the Cardinals, who flashed to an easy 29-0 win. But that was all in fun, for in reality, the new-look Chargers were devastating. Just ask the Cardinals about number 33, Donnie Woods. Woods' 13-yard run opened the scoring, but St. Louis came back to lead 10-6 on a pass from Jim Hart to J.V. Kane. But as they say of Margaret Mitchell's book, Gone with the Wind, that's all she wrote. Because in the second quarter, the Chargers blew in for 27 points and a runaway. Dan Fouts to Charlie Joyner was good for 30 yards and 6 points. Dan Fouts to injured Gary Garrison's replacement Dwight McDonald, number 89, was good for 44 yards and 6 points. When Fouts and McDonald connected again, the Cardinals didn't have a ghost of a chance. The usually big play Birds from St. Louis were left standing with egg on their face, 43-24. The Chargers are 3-0 and have won more games than they did in all of '75. And as Egbert McDropping says, here's hopping. They can keep it up. But Cardinal fans can't let their team rest, for St. Louis must keep on chugging to keep pace with Dallas in the NFC East, a task made simpler last week by a genuine rarity, a Cardinal defensive touchdown. Mike Sensabaugh's 35-yard interception return set the tone for the entire afternoon as both teams turned in alert, opportunistic, heads-up, defensive play. But New York's cunning defense could only outwit the Cardinals for so long. With Jim Otis sidelined, Jim Hart turned to his replacement, number 34, Steve Jones. And the fourth-year fullback responded with 85 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, enough to keep the Giants winless. In St. Louis, the end zone was clearly in view, but the path toward it was a treacherous one for both the Cardinals and the Philadelphia Eagles. The game was even into the second quarter, but then, like a pool hall hustler who's been trifling with his victim too long, the Cardinals showed their game and outscored the Eagles 33-7. We're not as good as we should be, said Cardinal coach Don Coryell, but we're getting better every week. One guy you never stick your tongue out at is Dallas quarterback Roger Staubach, whose tidy set of statistics has buried 5 straight opponents. Against the St. Louis Cardinals, Staubach and tight end Billy Joe Dupree meshed so perfectly it appeared the Cowboys were running skeleton drills on the practice field. However, the Cardinals were not unduly worried. For if Dallas has the faculty for producing the home run play, they also historically have the facility for allowing them. The Cowboys' deep defense was said to be soft, and Mel Gray, number 85, turned it into jello. In wide receiver Gray and setback Terry Metcalf, number 21, St. Louis has a 1-2 punch unrivaled in pro football. It was Metcalf's ability to evaporate into the secondary and behind Cowboy linebackers that produced a 14-10 lead for the Cardinals. Ultimately, the difference in the game was the Cowboys' failure to cash in on this opportunity created by Charlie Waters, number 41. Instead of reaping a touchdown, or at the very least a field goal, Dallas came up dry, while St. Louis engineered a 98-yard drive that ended in a lady luck touchdown by Gray. Gray rubbed a spike into Dallas' wounds and seemed to put some ginger in their offense. Operating behind the shotgun, Staubach spit out a final touchdown to Drew Pearson. Even though they managed to make the Cardinals bleed a little at the end, it was the Cowboys who died with their cleats on and lost their first game 21-17.
Next, they faced a Monday night monsoon and their first must game of the season. Allen told his men, "This is redskin weather, a perfect time to ambush their Eastern Division rivals, the high-flying St. Louis Cardinals." As usual, special teams were on the spot, and Mosley gave Washington an early lead. Still, the rains came as the showdown became a wallow through the mire. The elusive ball changed hands like a greased pig at the county fair. There were 13 fumbles in all, including an all-time record 8 recovered by Washington. In the midst of confusion, a coach looked to his secret weapon for victory. The special teams and Eddie Brown responded with a marvelous work and a wonder. Together overcame the elements and St. Louis, as Washington stayed alive in the East and breathed a sigh of relief.
Two more contenders played one of the season's strangest games last Sunday in St. Louis. The 49ers goof gave the Cardinals the ball inside the 10, and as San Francisco coach Monty Clark said later, that was the game right there. J.V. Kane's score gave St. Louis the lead after just 1.5 minutes of play, but the 49ers' league-leading defense allowed no more Cardinal scoring in the first half. Meanwhile, Jim Plunkett was handing off to Delvin Williams, number 24, and Williams ran wild. Del Williams rushed for 194 yards and the 2 touchdowns, which put the 49ers ahead at the half, 13-7. In the second half, the NFL's best pass protectors gave Jim Hart the time he needed. Terry Metcalf's score had the Cardinals ahead again, 14-13 after 3 quarters. But on the very next series, Jim Plunkett and the 49ers came right back. Newly acquired Jim Lash, number 87, made the big play. But then Jim Hart and Mel Gray made an even bigger play. Mel Gray's 77-yarder meant sudden death overtime, which belonged exclusively to the Cardinals' sometime forgotten fullback Jim Otis. Otis carried on 10 of the 11 offensive plays run in the overtime period, thereby setting up the game winner by Jim Bakken. For the Cardinals, who had lost in Washington 6 nights earlier, it was an important victory because it put them 1 game ahead of the Redskins and just 1 game behind the Cowboys in the torrid NFC East. In Philadelphia, the headlines announced a return grudge match. But in a game dominated by hard hitting, a calculated risk produced the game's first points. On 3rd down and short yardage, Mike Barilla and Charlie Smith caught the Cardinals napping. But this contest would be decided in the pit. Bill Berge and the improved Eagle defense against Jim Otis and that nasty Cardinal offensive line. Berge and the Eagles won the early rounds, but Otis and the Cardinal front just never stopped coming. And as the final stanza began to unfold, clearly St. Louis had gained the upper hand. Otis finished with 115 yards, and his 4th quarter bursts made possible a Jim Bakken field goal and a 3-point Cardinal advantage. Then, the Eagles made that one fatal mistake. Dave Hampton's unfortunate fumble cost the Eagles a chance to tie and go into overtime. In a contest as balanced as this one, and over the course of a season for that matter, a handful of crucial mistakes often separate the winners from the also-rans. Jim Otis and the Cardinals deserved to win, but somehow Bill Berge's Eagles did not deserve to lose. In the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum last year, the Rams knocked St. Louis out of the playoffs. Number 11, Pat Hayden, was not there last year, but last week, he and Harold Jackson made it look like the same kind of game. The Rams led 14-6 at the half, and then the second half kickoff really put the Cardinals in a bind. Cullen Bryant, the 235-pound kick returner, put the Rams ahead 21-6. And then Jim Hart finally got his offense in gear. In the second half, Hart hit on 13 of 16 passes, and the Cardiac Cards scored 24 points, just enough to catch the Rams at the gun 30-28 for their third consecutive hair-raising victory. Unlike Dallas, the St. Louis Cardinals have shown no signs of turning stale. And against the Redskins, Terry Metcalf, number 21, demonstrated the quick strike potential of the NFC's top-rated offense. But at this time of the season, even the slickest teams skate on the thin ice that borders the wild and woolly and the downright dangerous. Thus, a Cardinal screen pass that eventuated into a flea flicker from their own end zone can be termed suicidal. However, it was not soft-headed plays, but a solid Redskin defense that denied St. Louis and sacked Jim Hart in crucial situations. Even behind a patchwork offensive line, nifty Mike Thomas, number 22, has been the wheelhorse of the Redskin attack. Thomas rushed for 195 yards, scored their lone touchdown, and gave them a lead from which they were never headed. Trailing 16-10, St. Louis made a belated comeback bid on the wings of a Jim Hart pass to Mel Gray. Gray's heroics fell just short of the tying touchdown as St. Louis dropped their second straight to Washington. George Allen's tired remnants and retreads keep hanging in, losing some they should win and winning some they should lose. But in the end, when a title or a wild card berth is in the offing, these salty old dogs are yapping and howling in the final scramble for that Super Bowl bone. Previous Thursday's events in Irving, Texas, where a Turkey Day crowd of 62,000 plus watched the Cowboys feast on another brand of bird. Dallas devoured the Cardinal attack, dominating all phases of play, especially the punting game. The Cowboys splintered the Cardinals' protective wall, blocked this punt, and notched 2 points. Special team superstar Thomas Henderson, number 56, breathed fire into Dallas's specialty units. A Super Bowl contender like the Cowboys depends upon inspired special team play to keep their winning edge. Last Sunday, the Cowboys turned in 2 crucial plays in punting situations. Danny White's 4th down pass to Benny Barnes came with but a minute to play in the first half. 4 plays later, Roger Staubach made it hurt. Dallas's 2 4th down successes proved to be the pivotal plays in the contest. They accounted for 9 of the 12 points that Dallas led by late in period 4 before the Cardiac Cardinals turned on their pacemakers. But for the second week in succession, St. Louis's last-minute heroics did not a victory bring. The game ended with St. Louis on the Cowboy 8-yard line. 8 yards that may cost the Cardinals a playoff berth.
Baltimore Colts were next on the schedule. Right from the start, the Cardinals were on the attack against the Colts, and on this bright December day, a capacity crowd at Busch Stadium was treated to an old-fashioned barn burner, an aerial fireworks display between the two best pure passers in professional football. But even on this day, the Cardinals' high-powered air attack had to take a backseat to an inspired Big Red defense, which caused 4 Baltimore fumbles and a game-saving interception by Ken Reeves on the final play. The exciting triumph over the Colts kept the Cardinals' playoff hopes alive going into the final game of the season. Team trademark of nerve-wracking, nail-biting struggles continued as the Cards seemed flat and the Giants led. Then a Metcalf punt return ignited the spark. With 6 minutes remaining, from the full house backfield, Steve Jones scored the touchdown St. Louis had to have. With the narrow 3-point victory, the team now had to depend on Dallas to defeat Washington later that afternoon. St. Louis had won its last 2 games, 10 in all, and having accomplished everything they could for the 1976 season, the Cardinals went to the locker room to await their fate.